Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trilokyam Sacharacharam Tat Padam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravidam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Yata Sarvani Bhutani Pratibhanti Stitani Cha Yatra Evo Bhashamam Yanti Tasmai Satyatmane Namaha. So I think we're beginning a new chapter. Is that correct?
I think we started the new one last time.
We started it.
Yeah. We're on number 2930 on page 262.
Will you help us out, please, Puneet?
Sata Kundalini Prokta Nadayo Hrida Koshagaha Asyam Samasta Sabbadhaha Saiva Pranamayi Smrita Pranapana Swarutpatvat Adha Urdhvam Vrajatyasau. Therefore, this power or energy is called Kundalini, or the coiled one. All the nadis or channels of bioenergy in or going to the receptacle of the heart are connected with this. That alone is considered as consisting of prana or bioenergy. On account of its inherent nature being prana and apana, it moves up and down in the body. There's a note. The references to Kundalini and prana in traditional literature are invariably clothed in mystic language. Any comparison with modern physiological knowledge often fails to convince one about their reality vis-a-vis the human body complex. But the first-hand experiences of yogins, ancient and modern, stand testimony to the irrefutable fact of their existence and operation and of their role in the evolution of human consciousness.
Yes. So certainly is Kundalini real? Yes. Is its penetration of the chakras real? Yes. Do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about what you experienced on your Vipassana retreat? So we don't really teach much about Kundalini and about the chakras in Vedanta practice, but out of the blue, while he was on a Vipassana retreat, this is what happened to, who are you? Puneet.
It just felt like something pierced the area, the perineum, I guess it's called the date as well. And it felt like it was moving up, and it felt like something was actually penetrating. So it was a very vivid feeling. And yeah, there was a lot of heat and energy in my abdomen area after that. And that moved up and went up to my, the belly button. And I tried to go up, but it didn't work further. But yeah, it felt like there was another sort of penetration that happened near the belly button.
So when Swamiji was asked about this sort of stuff, he would basically say, you notice it, don't try to resist it or suppress it, but understand that it is phenomena. It has a beginning and an end. It occurs in time and space. So that's not it. And many of us can get quite caught up into wanting to raise the Kundalini. I was with a group, we were disciples of Yogi Bhajan. I don't even know if that group's still around anymore. This is in the early 70s, before I met Swamiji. We would do what they called fire breath. We'd huff and puff and huff and puff and stuff like that. Not really high. I think basically we were hyperventilating. But it is a very real part of yoga. It's a definite part of the whole branch of Raja Yoga. And as I have said before, one of the beauties of Yoga Vasishtha is it gives equal weight to the path of Raja Yoga and the path of Jnana Yoga. You do not need to focus on Kundalini to realize your self-nature. I'm only going to briefly touch on this. Through intense vairagya and intense self-inquiry, essentially what we do is open the crown chakra first. And then the knowledge filters down through the equipment, rather than raising the energy from the bottom up. But many people have experiences. And for example, I had made some reference about some people will get a buzzing in their crown chakra. So I had a student come and said, oh, my crown chakra is buzzing. Am I getting close, Jim? No, stop it. Who are you? Oh, I want to have Nirvikalpa Samadhi. I want to have Nirvikalpa Samadhi. You start jonesing for these experiences, and that becomes another object of desire. Now, if you've done Kundalini Yoga, Raja Yoga, Kriya Yoga in other lives, very likely those things will reemerge in your sadhana. Anybody have thoughts on this? Yes, you're a yogi.
Can you speak to the difference between Nirvikalpa being an experience versus Nirvikalpa being knowledge?
Yes. Did you hear his question? We always teach Nirvikalpa with two understandings. The first is Nirvikalpa is the mind state of no mind. Technically speaking, anytime the mind is free from what we call vimarsha, deliberation, and all you've got is prakasha, the light of pure awareness, you're in Nirvikalpa. There are fleeting samadhis. I like to use the example of the person who's on the BART train at rush hour. And he spaces out. And his mind comes back and someone says, what were you thinking? I don't know, I was just gone. Nirvikalpa. But his attention was extroverted when his mind stopped. His attention was extroverted when his mind returned. So what did he realize? Back of BART's seat. So for nirvikalpa to be efficacious, you must have this radical reversal of the attentive faculty. Now, for some people who experience nirvikalpa, it's this big explosive kind of state. Everything stops and you're lost in it for hours. For others, it may just be a little shift, a little click. What does nirvikalpa do? It reveals beyond a doubt what our self-nature is. That's the goal.
Right.
Now, nirvikalpa also is defined in scriptures as that state where the knower, knowing, and known are merged into one. So how do you know you are you? Do you see, hear, taste, touch, smell, emote, or think yourself? Do you?
No.
No. How do you know you are you? Who's the knower of you? I am. What's the pramana, the means of knowledge for knowing me? Me. What's that which is known? Never as an object, yet it's not unknown. I. So, as Shankara thunders in his great hymn, Nirvana Shatakam, Aham Nirvikalpo. He doesn't say I'm in Nirvikalpa. He doesn't say I've attained nirvikalpa. What does he say? I am nirvikalpa. Now, if the phenomenal world, including the mind, is essentially all imagination, pratibimba, like reflections in a mirror, in truth, you are always in nirvikalpa because the mind is unreal. Always different things to do about it. Now, in Tripura Rahasyam, nirvikalpa is not the highest state. Sahaja Samadhi is the highest state. The way it's explained in the very first story of Hemaleka and Hemachuda. So she gives him instructions, Hemaleka does, and Hemachuda goes up to his crystal tower and he gets all set and starts meditating, and sometimes he sees light and sometimes he sees darkness. And then he falls asleep. And then he says, this is all very different. I'll try again. So he goes back into meditation. Mind you, this is all compressed of our sadhana. And he finds the state. No thought exists. There's just deep, deep bliss. He sends word to have Hemaleka come. She comes like the queen of the night up the stairway to the crystal tower. There, Hemachuda is deep in nirvikalpa samadhi. She goes up to him and tugs on him. Husband, husband. He comes out like a drunkard and says, my dear, how is it that you, knowing of this state, are not engaged in it always? Leave me alone. Let me go back to samadhi. Oh. She pulls up again. My dear, how can it be a perfect state when its gain or loss is accomplished by the opening or the closing of the eyes, the length of 8 grains of barley. You are as far away from perfection as the sky is above the earth. So practically speaking, it's when we see the self in and through all the objects of the world, when there's no longer any inside, no outside, then the backside of the mind, as it were, is always at peace, because you have no doubts. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All this phenomenal world is verily Brahman. Even though that person may be seen to be functioning in the world from the outside, inside, Gatte Gatte Param Gatte Parasam Gatte Bodhiswa. God, completely gone beyond. Fully awake. Wow. So we always teach Nirvikalpa as the state of no mind, and Nirvikalpa meaning another name for the self. Did that answer your question?
Partially, at least. What I'm sort of digging at is you warn not to be after the experience of Nirvikalpa, but if we're after the experience of constant knowledge, does that have a different term than Nirvikalpa?
I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't worry about it.
Not worried about the terminology per se, but I'm interested in pursuing the constant knowledge. So is that?
So I would not necessarily focus on Nirvikalpa as an intermediate step to steady wisdom.
Okay.
Just focus on steady wisdom.
Okay.
Now, what keeps the mind from slipping into Nirvikalpa? It is vasana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not about attaining what we call a jada samadhi. So if you're a Raja Yogi and you're doing all this pranayama and endeavoring to get very concentrated and stuff like that, and you're going to stop your mind by having the bandhas and having the anal lock and the chin lock, what you are likely to experience is I, the individual, see nothing. Why? Because when you're not practicing your pranayama, how are you doing with the world? I want this, I don't want that. Meaning there's still vasana. So my suggestion, give up, give up, give up. Swamiji would describe it this way, because when we study Viveka Chudamani, actually Shankara has a very long section about samadhi. Do you remember that one?
Not off the top of my head at the moment.
It's very interesting to pursue it. To revisit it. Swamiji said, actually, you can't really practice Nirvikalpa.
Right.
You can only practice Savikalpa Samadhi. Just like you can't practice sleeping. You can only practice getting sleepy. If I put on my jammies, drink my chamomile tea, fluff my pillow, turn the lights down, I practice becoming sleepy, the mind will slip into sleep. Practicing Savikalpa Samadhi, meaning tuning up the mind. This intense introversion of the mind, not letting it extrovert into the world. Letting everything just pass through. No reaction. Empty, empty, empty. Burn up all those desires, all those identifications. When the last attachment, the last identification is gone, the mind will slip into samadhi. And again, it may be some thunderous kind of experience for you. But it may just be the world drops away and all of a sudden you know who you are. Oh, there's nobody there. Now, was it Jory who had studied Chandogya? Is that correct, Jory? Is he gone?
Yes, I did, Jim.
Oh, yes. So it's interesting. In Chandogya, the author of the Upanishad says the inhale is apana and the exhale is prana, which is the opposite of what we're taught in most Hatha yoga traditions. Isn't that the opposite of what you were taught?
I don't remember.
Yeah. And I wondered about this, and my friend D.C. Rao, who's quite a scholar, cleared it up for me. Actually, the ones speaking are the celestial beings, the devas. And for them, their exhalation is our inhalation. Our exhalation is their inhalation. So it's not inconsistent. Very subtle thing. I totally missed it. So if you read Christopher Wallace's translation of the Recognition Sutras, he reverses them, just like Chandogya does. It's not a typo. It's a misunderstanding of the scripture. All right, next verse. Any other questions about Kundalini and pranayama? If you're intuitively led to do these practices, do them. It's okay. Going on.
New section. Section 3. Adi Vyadhaya, the diseases of the mind and body. Yadyanta maruto ruddha vyadhijanto na jayate deha dukkham vidu vyadhim adhyakhyam vasanamayam. If the vital air is bound or restrained within, physical ailment is not produced in a living being. The distress of the body is known as physical disease. Mental affliction consists of mental impressions or knowledge derived from memory agitating the human psyche.
So when the body is out of balance, when the flow of the prana is disturbed, and there are five, the pancha vayu, the five subtle airs. So they govern inhalation, exhalation and excretion, circulation, digestion, and thinking. And through pranayama, you can gain control of all these 5 airs, the Panchavaya. If you practice pranayama and do asana, you will probably be more healthy. If you eat a sattvic diet, get a proper amount of sleep and exercise. But what is it that messes with our minds? Here the scripture says the fundamental cause. I didn't hear him use the word chintya. What did he talk about? Mental rumination over past events. Memory.
He didn't use chintya. It says vasana mayam.
Okay, I'm going to use the word chintya, which in Sanskrit means after the fact rumination, revisiting prior events. It's not always worry. It can also be after the fact rumination over pleasant events. It is this that creates impression. It is this that creates vasana. It is vasana that covers our self-apprehension and is the cause of all our problems. So many spiritual traditions now, in some form or another, are echoing Ram Dass, be here, now. What's the Eckhart Tolle book? Something of now.
Power of now.
The power of now. It's right here. It's now. Remember, we had the story about the 3 demons and the 3 super demons. How were the first 3 demons defeated? The devas kept messing with their minds and caused them to have chintya, reflecting on their victory. Once they did that, they had fear, they had egoism, they could be defeated. That's what defeats all. How do you keep it from happening? Put your mind where your hands are working. If you're doing the laundry, do nothing but the laundry. If you're making the bed, do nothing but make the bed. If you're writing code at work, do nothing but write the code. It can involve planning. If you've got a meeting, do nothing but plan for the meeting. Do our best to stay away from I-ness and minus thoughts, projecting into the future, worrying about the past. It is this. And now, contemporary psychology has all sorts of names for it. PTSD. What does PTSD stand for?
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah. Meaning the traumatic event has left a deep impression. The mind returns to it. If it's intense enough, you can't even control it at all. But for most of us, small little slights, hurts, etc. Swami Tejo Mayananda used to say, we squander our most prized possession, our peace of mind, over an unkind word. Or a slight of some sort. Shankara's very famous image. You want to have a mind like a wicker basket with water pouring into it. Just let everything pass through. Now, I'm going to give you a secret, which you probably won't use. Most of us yogis are more than willing to attempt to renounce and let go of our suffering. Few are willing to renounce and let go of our achievements, our success, our romances, our pleasures. When that comes down the pike, are we empty and we let it through? Or we go, ooh, now you're hooked. When it gets taken away, notice I did not say if. When it gets taken away, it's too late. You're already attached. And you're just going to have to weep. Any thoughts on this? It takes great yoga bala to give up the world when it's working for us. Mm-hmm. All right, next verse.
Durnabhya vaharena durdeshakramanena cha dushkala vyavaharena durjan sanga doshatah kshinatvat vatipurnatvat nadinam ranghra santatau prane vidhuratam yate vyadhi dehe pravartate. Disease occurs in the body when prana or bioenergy reaches deprivation in the series of cavities of the nadis or channels of bioenergies such as nerves, arteries, and veins. Due to the eating of bad food, the occupation of bad places, the conduct of affairs in unsuitable time, the evils of association with bad people, and by the diminution or overfilling of the system with the necessities of life.
Yeah. So you lead an unhealthy life, you're probably going to get sick. It's basically what he's saying. Ramana Maharshi was once asked, how do I have a sattvic mind? Had a very interesting answer. Eat sattvic food. Live a sattvic life will maximize your health. Overindulgence or deprivation isn't good. They may not have known about pollution and environmental stuff like that, but they had an idea of what are places that aren't healthy. And company that isn't good for us. Now, some schools of thought will say, change your behavior and the mind will follow. The metaphysical schools say, change your fundamental attitudes and your body will change. Yoga says, yes, both are true. We don't work just from the body and ignore the mind, nor do we work just from the mind without our behavior changing. Because the body is just a grossified form of the mind. The mind is just a subtle form of the body. They're like an iceberg. There's a visible part, the majority is invisible. This is why people who chronically engage in resentment or fear or rehashing old traumatic events in time can make themselves really sick, not psychosomatic, but it will really disturb the balance of the body. Likewise, if you lead an unhealthy physical lifestyle, drink too much, eat too much food, don't get enough exercise, get caught up in drug addiction, it will affect your mind. Any thoughts on this? Going on.
Adhi kshaye chadi bhavaha chiyante vyadya yopyalam anadhija vyadhasyastu dravyamantra shubha kramaihi chikitsakadshastroktaihi nashyanti tvam cha vetsitat. On the removal of mental sickness, even physical ailments born of mental sickness are surely destroyed. But the physical ailments not produced by mental sickness perish by auspicious methods of employing suitable materials and mantras or sacred words, and through following the words of the science of healing or medical treatment. You also know that.
Yes. So, theoretically, virtually any disease can be healed through a shifting of sankalpa. In theory. In practice, it's not so simple. Some of these deep things that show up in the body are prarabdha karma. We use physical medicine. Sometimes even that doesn't work. And we have to practice acceptance. We have to practice acceptance. But much of our health is determined by our mental attitude. So, if you know at a deep level that you live and move and have your being in God, that it's a beneficent universe that conspires for your well-being if you let it.
Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Alexa, stop. She's arguing. Yeah. A beneficent world that conspires for our well-being if we let it, and even if we don't know it. I had a colleague at my old church job who used to say, God has given me everything I never knew I really wanted. I thought I wanted this, and I was all unhappy because I didn't get it. But what I got was something so much richer. Practicing a grateful heart. Being grateful can be a practice, especially if you've been programmed by your parents. You're always catastrophizing, thinking of, well, if I'm prepared for the worst, then I don't have to worry about it. No. It's not good yoga. Expect a miracle. Expect grace. It's all going to work out. Be chill. Yoga Vasishtha came up with that term. Shitala manasa. Coolness of mind. Be chill. Now, this will not only keep your mind at peace, but it'll have an influence on your body and an influence on your affairs. Any thoughts on this? Now, do bad things happen to good people? Yes. Do bad things happen to deep yogis? Yes. Guess what? They all die. It may not be a bad thing. So here what this scripture is talking about, there's a mind-body connection, and it's not simplistic. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Chitte vidhurite deha Samshobham upayati hai Samshobhat Samyam utsrijya Vahanti pranavayavaha. When the mind is agitated, the body indeed goes to the state of agitation. On account of agitation, the vital airs or currents of bioenergy flow, giving up evenness.
Now, there was a fellow in Punjab in the mid-19th century during the British Raj. His name was Thomas Troward. He was a judge in Punjab. He was actually born in India to British parents, returned to England for his schooling, came back to India and worked as a judge in civil service. But he had a deep interest in yoga philosophy. Now, the biographies say he learned the local languages, whether it was Punjabi, whether it was Hindi. My suspicion is he had rudimentary Sanskrit, because he, I am pretty convinced, was studying this text or texts like it. So when he retired, he went off to England and he lectured and wrote books, and they are boring because he writes like a judge. But the two that are most famous are the Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science and the Creative Process in the Individual. He was a major influence on the New Thought movement, which was a late 19th century, 20th century movement. People like Ernest Holmes, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, of course, one of the greatest was Emma Curtis Hopkins. Modern people, anybody done Terry Cole Whitaker, or who wrote the one, You Can Heal Your Life? Can't think of her name now. All these modern metaphysical healers that have been so popular, they all come from Yoga Vasishtha, where we go into the idea that thoughts are things and they have wings, that there is a mind-body relationship. Now, we don't teach this, or I do not teach it to beginners, because there's a trap. For example, if I sit down and do the Sankalpa, Cadillac, Cadillac, I want a Cadillac, Cadillac, Cadillac. You may manifest a Cadillac, but you're not dealing with the fundamental problems of spiritual ignorance, which is this deeply rooted belief that getting what I want is going to make me happy. I guarantee you, you get the Cadillac, it's going to break, because all Cadillacs break. Do not deal with the personal sentence of self. By the way, this practice of dream shaping, as it were, is the deepest understanding of what Tantra is. It's the wielding of energy. This world is like a dream, but it doesn't have to be a nightmare. One of the things I like to point out, those of you who've done these Vipassana retreats, I have been told, I have done one, that they do the metta meditation at the end. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And the way I learned the metta meditation, may all beings be happy, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be liberated, or something like that, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Why do you think they do it at the end of the meditation, and why do they do it at all?
Mind is most powerful at the end.
Why is it most powerful at the end? What state is it in?
Quiet mind.
Quiet and empty. So when you're making a sankalpa, it's not about willpower and effort. No, it comes from clear intention and knowing. But it's a sankalpa. It's a tantric meditation to make a difference in the world. It's right there. All goes back to yoga. All goes back to yoga. So the Tibetan Buddhists, who are the most proficient tantric practitioners, I would say, today, got a very, very well-developed school of it. When they do a tantric meditation, they'll use aids to focus belief and intention. They'll do these, I forget what the paintings are called, mandalas, yantras, whatever they are. But they always begin and end with a meditation on shunyata, emptiness. When they do these fantastic sand paintings, what do they do at the end of it? Impermanence. So this is the trap that this manifesting philosophy people can get caught in. They don't deal with these fundamental, deep issues that the Vedanta deals with. Now, Shankara may not have written a lot about this, but he was obviously a practitioner of it because he could teleport, do all sorts of things, all sorts of stories of him doing miracles. All right, that's about all I want to say about this tonight. Any thoughts on it? Anybody have things they want to share? Next verse. Oh, let me summarize. So in the beginning, we're concerned with our relationship with the mind. I am not my thoughts. I am something other. I am the witness of them. But as we progress, we can also start to pay attention to the content of our mind. You can send peace. You can practice forgiving. But I don't feel it, Jim. Start by saying the words. Shut them. All right, next verse.
Asame vahati prane nadyo yanti visansthitim urjirnatvam ajirnatvam atijirnatvam va doshayaiva prayatyannam nida prana viparyayat. When the currents of bioenergy flow unevenly, their channels or nadis attain to an improper condition. Because of the perverseness of the bioenergy currents in their channels, the food which is eaten goes forth only towards causing harm by bad digestion, indigestion, or even overdigestion.
So this is this cycle of the development of disease. Diseased mind. My mind's not at ease, which messes with the prana. The prana starts to block energy flows. Then the food starts to not be used in an appropriate way. Things get out of balance in the body. One of the things I've never had a doctor explain to me, we have a doctor tonight. So there's a virus going around. Why is it that one person gets sick and another person doesn't? Does medicine have an explanation for that, Mark?
Well, if they're both exposed equally, then it could be genetic, or it could be that they've already have created an immunity by being exposed to other similar viruses, or even that virus in the past. But the reaction of the body depends on also the genetic and the condition of the body.
Yeah. Complex. Perhaps largely unknown. What yoga would say is, for one person, the body is out of balance, which makes them vulnerable. The other person, things are in balance, so their immune system responds better. All right, next verse.
Yani nirodhena tishtantyanta sharirake tanyeva vyadhitam yanti parinam swabhavatah evam adhe bhavet vyadhi adhinascha cha nashyati. The foods which remain within the body by obstruction to their proper digestion and assimilation They alone go to the state of physical sickness by their innate disposition or tendency towards transformation or decline. Thus, physical ailment can also be produced on account of mental sickness, and it perishes on the disappearance of such mental sickness.
Yes. So, do germs cause disease? Yes. But what makes one person vulnerable and another person not? Yoga would say there's a strong mental component to health. I will go even further. There's a strong mental component to the situations in your life that you draw to you. Did I share with you guys last week about when I got on the bus with my ball cap with the Om on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, things like that happen to me all the time.
What was the story?
Oh, so I'm across the street catching the number 12 bus. The bus driver goes, "I like your cap." A South Asian accent. I'm not good with imitating accents, except Swamiji's. And he goes, "Om!" I said, "Yes, it is." So when I was getting off the bus, I said, "Hari Om Maharaj." And he goes, "Oh, Om Namah Shivaya. You know Om Namah Shivaya?" I said, "Yes, I do. Om Namah Shivaya." So we both had this little joyful connection. These things happen all the time. All the time. I'll sit down to a little old lady next to a little old lady, and she wants to talk about God. Oh, I love to talk about God. Other people, they live in a scary universe. Careful when you're crossing the street, as somebody's gonna grab and snatch. You know, don't walk alone. There are people they live this way. They live this way. Now, I'm not saying be stupid. But we carry an aura with us. It's based on our mental atmosphere. I jokingly tell people, "Oh, Jim, don't come too close. I've got a cold." They'll say, "Well, I have a contagious case of health. Let me hug you." Mm. You can do it in preparation for a meeting. Spend time. Every one of these people is a divine incarnation of God. When I go into this meeting, I'm going to communicate to that highest self. We're going to come up with answers. We're going to find solutions. You can set intentions. Nothing wrong with that. And then you have to let it go. Man proposes, but God disposes. All right, next verse.
Yatha virekam kurvanti haritakya svabhavatah bhavanavashato mantraihi karmana sadhu sevaya mana prayati nairmalyam anando vardhate tada. Just as myrobalans, astringent plum-like fruits, produce purging by their very nature. The mind attains to purity or stainlessness on account of contemplation or feeling or of devotion, by mantras or sacred words, by appropriate rituals, and by the service of the virtues. Then happiness grows.
Yes. So let's look at the opposite idea. So can't remember with whom I was talking. Oh, it was you, where you were talking about having seen in your own mind some habitual attitude that was similar to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked the question, where did they get it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To whom did it belong? But how did that mental habit get into your mind in the first place? Through focusing on seeing it in your parents and repetition, repetition, repetition.
Yeah.
For how many instances did your parents say things that made you feel guilty?
I don't know, many.
Millions, probably, right?
Yeah.
So they can be changed. That's the good news. How do we change them? First, inside. We take up a practice of thought replacement. Now, let me share with you how not to do thought replacement. My mother used to say, Jim, you think of yourself too much. You're too self-centered. So I was obsessed. Am I being self-centered? Am I being self-centered? Am I being self-centered? Only made me more self-centered, more self-obsessed. Of course, the scriptures say, don't think of the elephant. Don't think of its long trunk. Don't think of its big ears, etc. So we are not healed by what we turn from, but by what we turn to. As Krishna will say in the chapter on Bhakti Yoga, fix your mind on me. Worship me, think of me, do all actions for me. Jory and I were talking about study of scripture. Should you study scripture? If that brings your mind to the infinite, if that, to use the term Jory shared with me, soaking the mind in Brahman. And all those old thoughts will disappear. Now, let me share with you something where yoga diverges from psychology. Much of psychology is about finding out why you think and feel the way you do. Yoga, to borrow the terminology from Werner Erhard, would say, understanding is the booby prize. Understanding where something came from does not change the thought. Knowing that the guilt came from your mother and father doesn't make it go away, doesn't change the habit. It might be useful, insightful, but we change it by abhyasa, practice. Now, since we're in a section that we're talking about Raja Yoga, Puneet and Sound and I have been studying that text on Saturday mornings. And one of my favorite sutras is at the beginning of the second chapter. Tapas Swadhyayeshwara Pranidhana Kriya Yoga. Tapas, usually translated as austerity. Swadhyaya. In the Vedanta tradition, Swadhyaya, which means self-study, means we study the scriptures on our own after we've learned them from the teacher. In Yoga Sutra, it means examining our own interior psychology. Ishvara Pranidhana, trustful surrender to God. These three together make up Kriya Yoga, yoga in action. So actually we start with the middle part first. In meditation, the unconscious will unload. My God, do I really believe that? Oh my God. Get insights. What comes next? Tapas. Tapas means taking on the practice of not allowing the mind to habitually go down those old channels of thinking. Instead, we replace them. This is abhyasa. It's a practice. Why do we call it tapas? Because the mind is ruled by the law of inertia. Inertia is a body will, in a vacuum, will stay in motion or in rest indefinitely until energy is applied to change it. So whatever your habituated thinking is, it's just going to stay there until we do the tapas, which is to apply the purushartha, the self-effort, to change. Now, if you're like Arjuna and Gita at the end of the 6th chapter, he says to Krishna, "Oh, Krishna, to try to control the mind is like trying to control the wind." And Krishna says, "True that." But it can be accomplished practice. Practice. Then we have that third part. Lord, I'm failing at controlling this habituated thinking. God, help me. Turn it over to God. Ishvara Pranidhana, trustful surrender to God. It's a fabulous sutra. It's incredibly useful, incredibly powerful. And it deals with what Yoga Vasishtha is talking about tonight. Any thoughts on this? Anybody have any doubts on how to do these practices? So the foolish person thinks, well, this is just the way I am and I'm not going to change. All right. You're welcome to your misery. But it doesn't have to be a shit show. And we are not victims. We are not victims. As children, yes, we were victims. For example, for Sandarya. If you were a child and your parents laid all these things on you, yes, you were an undeserving, hapless child. They did it out of love, but it was hurtful. But they're not saying that to you now. You know what I mean? They're off in India. So I am responsible as an adult, as a yogi. I am not a victim today. Very important. And I have news for you. You will fail. The beauty of yoga is we do it in the now, today. And I think I've shared with you my favorite prayer. Oops. Oops. I totally reacted. Oops. And so you start over. New beginning. New beginning. All right. That's it. So we have time. What's the next verse? What number?
There's one more before a new section.
Okay, let's finish it. Do you mind staying a minute or so? Let's hope I don't get wound up. Yeah.
Sattva Shuddhaya Vahyanyete Ramena Prana Vayavaha Jarayanti Tatha Nani Vyadhitena Vinashyati. By the purity of mind, these vital airs flow in regular course. So also the foods are digested. Because of that, physical ailment perishes.
Yes. So, purity of mind, changing the fundamental texture of our mind. As beginner and intermediate yogis, we are working on changing our relationship with the mind, but also working on thought replacement, having a better attitude. And as I said earlier, doesn't matter if you don't feel it or don't believe it. We start by just saying the words and repeat it. Lather, rinse, repeat. All right. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om. Thank you all.